Good evening, my name is Joel Levine, and I had the pleasure of giving the last lecture, and I've been asked to introduce tonight's speaker as well. I'm a tour guide here, and Jack Johnson is going to give the speech, the introduction tonight, the lecture. Jack Johnson is an inveterate traveler, amateur photographer, and architecture buff. He has been able to pursue these interests unfettered since retiring in 2002 from a 32-year career in the New York and Miami offices of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He's a longtime tour guide and a member of the Board of Directors of the Miami Design Preservation League, a former chair of the Miami Beach Community Development Corporation, and a former member of the Miami Beach Planning Board. Jack, please.
Thank you very much, Joel. Last month, Joel gave a lecture on Tel Aviv, and prior to that, we had a lecture on Asmara, Eritrea. All of this is leading up to Art Deco Weekend 2018 in January, the theme of which is going to be Art Deco Around the World. The United States, after all, is part of the world. And so we're going to talk today about West Coast Art Deco. In 2007, I made 2 trips to the West Coast and spent time in 3 cities, Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And made a point in each city of finding Art Deco gems and photographing them. So those are the 3 cities we're going to concentrate on today, and there'll be some surprises as well. Before we begin, I want to talk a little bit about what West Coast Art Deco is. Not that it's a thing, but as you will notice during the lecture, a lot of the dates that you'll hear of buildings are closer to 1929, 1930, 1931 than the late 30s. So many of these buildings were in the pipeline, if not built, prior to the stock market crash. And so money was no object. They were built in order to project the image of a company or the image of the developer, and they are decorated very elaborately in ways that our buildings here in Miami Beach generally are not, which is not to say that they aren't beautiful buildings, just that they are a later form of Art Deco, sometimes referred to as streamlined modern, which is more geometric, not quite so elaborately decorated. You might say not so gaudy. So we're going to begin with Seattle, although actually we're not going to begin with Seattle. We're going to begin with Kirkland, Washington. We're going to the Lake Washington shipyards, where the MV Kalakala was in 2007 docked in the shipyards there. The Kalakala was the world's first streamlined vessel. Kalakala means flying bird in the Chinook language. It was designed by Louis Proctor, a Boeing engineer, and launched in 1935. And for 2 years after its launch, it was the second most photographed object in the world after the Eiffel Tower. Why only 2 years? Because in 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge was built. And we'll be talking about that a little later in the lecture. It was retired it served as part of the Washington State ferry system and was retired in 1967. It served for many years as after 1967 as a salmon processing facility in Alaska, and was acquired by Steve Rodriguez. This is Steve. In 2004. After that, Steve spent many years attempting to raise the necessary funds in order to restore the Kalakala and put it back into service, possibly as a ship, possibly as an event venue. Whatever he was able to do with it, he was willing to do. When I went to Seattle and Googled Art Deco Seattle, the kalakala.org was the first thing that came up. And I wondered what on earth was the Kalakala. So I called the number on the website and left a message, and within minutes, Steve called back. And the next day he came to my hotel in Seattle and drove me up to Kirkland and gave me a tour of the Kalakala. As you can see, it, in its former glory, was quite a fabulous ferry boat. But Rodriguez was never successful in raising the money that he needed. And the ship was condemned by the Coast Guard in 2011. Prior to making this lecture, I sent an email to Steve and asked him what's happened to the Kalakala, thinking that he would tell me that, you know, he had raised money and begun restoration of the ship. This is his response. Jack, thank you for contacting me. The Kalakala was evicted from Carl Anderson's property. Carl Anderson was the owner of the shipyard. Then Carl forced a foreclosure sale, and then he himself scrapped it at his dry dock in Tacoma. 2 years ago, we have saved most of the entire flying bridge deck. This is the flying bridge deck. And I am on the selection committee to determine artistic and preservation concepts and plans for saving the original flying bridge deck. The city's Kalakala committee has just shortlisted 28 requests for qualifications down to 4 remaining artists from around the US and even responses from London. Our Kalakala is no longer with us, but her history and our flying bridge deck will exemplify what remains of her. I am sorry to have not been able to overcome the negative politics. The state, city, and federal government entities who were responsible to protect our significant historic Kalakala violated many laws while destroying and forcing her never to have a home port or enabling her to open her doors. Time has taken her away. So on that sad note, we begin our tour of West Coast Art Deco and proceed to Seattle. Oh, by the way, I mentioned that the Kalakala was designed by a Boeing engineer. This gives you a good idea of what inspired him. Notice the porthole windows. Take a look at the nose of this aircraft and compare it to the nose of the Kalakala, and you can see a lot of similarities. So we begin with the old Federal Building, designed in Seattle, designed by James Wetmore and built in 1932. Beautiful example of Federal Art Deco architecture. And the Exchange Building, designed by John Graham and built in 1929. beautiful floral patterns incised into the concrete. And this extraordinary lobby, elevator lobby, with the gold leaf over the elevators and gold leaf carved plaster ceiling, and wonderful stained glass window. Then this is the old Bar Marché department store, which is now a Macy's. Dates from 1929. Still serves as a department store. It has this wonderful fern design over the entrance. And I can only presume that this is a restored carpet or a copy of the original. I doubt seriously that the original carpet lasted this long. But inside it has this wonderful plaque, which is preserved inside the department store. Then we have the Tower building, which dates from 1930 and has these extraordinary Art Deco decorations, both outside and inside. And then the Washington Athletic Club. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the form of Art Deco skyscrapers, because it's a real thing. And this is a good example of it. And it comes from this building. This was the design submitted by Eliel Saarinen for the competition for the Chicago Tribune building in Chicago. It came in second. Those of you who know Chicago know that the Chicago Tribune building is a Gothic revival building. But this is perhaps the most influential building ever not built. And as you can see in this photograph of a photograph, it has setbacks. It has lots of decoration on the top of the building, which is intended to be seen from a distance, and lots of decoration on the bottom of the building, which is intended to be seen from the street. And then the middle of the building is relatively plain, with very strong vertical lines. That's the basic form of the Art Deco skyscraper, and you'll see it in cities all over the world. This Washington Athletic Club certainly follows that pattern. It has setbacks, it has very strong vertical lines in the middle of the building, decorative elements at the top intended to be seen from a distance, and at the bottom to be seen from the street. This is a depiction of Adam and Eve. And then the Seattle Tower, which follows the same basic pattern. Designed by Albertson, Wilson, and Richardson, and built in 1928. It has lots of Mayan influences, as you can see here, and in this grate in the lobby. A spectacular lobby with a coffered plaster ceiling. These decorations over the elevator doors are intended to evoke the forests of the Pacific Northwest. And you'll notice the 3 chandeliers. This is a close-up of one of them. And at the back of the elevator lobby is this map. It's an interesting map because it's not a map of the United States. It's a map of the Pacific Rim. And it acknowledges the fact that many of the original tenants of this building were involved in the Trans-Pacific trade. The Trans-Pacific trade was really more responsible for the city of Seattle than the rest of the United States. You can see that the city of Seattle is very prominently evoked here in the map. And notice the title of the map. It says, "Westward the course of empire takes its way." The men, and they were mostly men, who worked in this building thought of themselves as empire builders. At least their companies, they expected to be empire builders, if not the United States. Wherever I travel, I look for preserved Art Deco signs, and Seattle has its share. This is just a couple that I thought were really quite beautiful. And we'll see more of them later on in the lecture. But for now, we're leaving Seattle and heading to San Francisco. This, of course, is one of the iconic pictures of San Francisco, with the gingerbread houses in the front and downtown San Francisco in the background, with the Transamerica Tower, which is now being overshadowed by a new building that's being built there. The other iconic image of San Francisco, of course, is the Golden Gate Bridge. Designed by Leon Moisseiff and Irving Morrow and built in 1937. This is the park at the San Francisco end of the bridge, and this is a cross-section of one of the cables. The cables don't look that big from a distance, but they in fact measure just over a yard in diameter. And these concrete piers look like mini skyscrapers on either side of the bridge. This picture gives you a hint of the Mayan influences in the decorative elements in the towers. And this cafe was built a year after the bridge. It's right next to that park that I just showed you, and also right next to the approach to the bridge. It was restored a year after I was there, and it is now an operating restaurant again. We're going to go neighborhood by neighborhood in San Francisco, and we're going to start with the Marina District, which is near the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'm going to show you 6 apartment buildings, all of which were designed by R.R. Irvine, and all of which were built in the early 1930s. This one has wonderful window spandrels that are ziggurats with etched vertical lines, and notice the crown at the top of the parapet. I suppose you could call this, if it were in Miami Beach, we would call this Med Deco because of the roof. I suppose because it's in California, we should call it Mission Deco. And this is the entrance decorations over the building. Notice the crown decoration at the top again. This is another R.R. Irvine building. Notice the glass door, the decorated glass doors, entrance doors. Those are the doors through which I took this picture. Most of the lobby photographs that you'll see are taken from this perspective because I couldn't get into the lobbies. They are relatively expensive apartment buildings, quite securely locked up. So I took the pictures through the lobby doors. Notice the beautiful frozen fountain design over the mirror and the niche. This is another our Irvine building with the same kinds of decorative elements in the lobby. This is the entrance to that building and a wide-angle view of it. Here's another Mission Deco, our Irvine building, with a similar lobby. Notice the Chinese Deco table. This, on the other hand, is a single-family residence designed by Herman Baumann and built in 1937. Because it's late 1930s, it's a simpler design with less ornamentation, more streamlining, but some very beautiful details nonetheless. Unfortunately, the current owners have rather unsympathetically replaced the windows. And every residential neighborhood needs its schools. This is the Marina Middle School, designed by George Kellum and Will Day and built in 1936. It has these wonderful wolves and lions in the parapets. And every residential neighborhood needs its theater as well. This is the Presidio Theater by John Anden, built in 1937. And again, we have neighborhood businesses, some of which still have their original Art Deco signs. Then we're going to the Pacific Heights neighborhood, and here we're going to talk about another architect, Herman Baumann. He has common elements in all of his buildings. Notice the three-sided bays with the decorative element at the bottom of the bottom of the bay, and also the sconces on either side of the entrance. Those are Herman Baumann's signatures. This is the lobby of the building. Notice the scored plaster columns and the opening at the back of the lobby. Openings at the back of the lobby are another Herman Baumann signature. This is another of his buildings, more elaborately decorated. And these are his original colors in the lobby of this building. And again, it shows the openings at the back of the building, both on the ground floor and on the second floor. I'm sorry, the back of the lobby. This is another Herman Baumann building, but it was not built until 1940, so it's simpler in design, but it still has the signature Baumann elements. And then this one is from 1931. And it still has the original lighting fixtures in the lobby, and again, the opening at the back of the lobby. Baumann was responsible for more than 500 residential buildings in San Francisco. Now we're going to go downtown, and this is the first Deco skyscraper built in San Francisco. Dates from 1926. It's the Pacific Telephone Company. Notice the bell emblem over the entrance, and the beautiful decorative elements here on the street level. This is the building seen from a distance. Again, strong vertical lines in the middle, and strong decorative elements at the top of the building intended to be seen from a distance. And this is a distance. We're a couple of blocks away from the building. The towers have bluebells, which were the floral emblem of the bell system, and eagles. And notice that each of the setbacks has these very strong decorative elements and rounded windows. This is again looking through the entrance door into the lobby. I was there on a weekend, so I couldn't get into the lobby. You can't see it very well, but the ceiling is a plaster ceiling with Chinese motifs. This is the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange building. As you would guess by the columned portico, it's an older building, but was remodeled in 1929 by Timothy Pfluger. That's P-F-L-U-E-G-E-R. I presume the P is silent. In any event, I don't want to try to pronounce it, so we'll go with Pfluger. And we'll see more of his buildings. The sculptures are by local artist Ralph Stackpole. This is the Shell building. As far as I know, it has no connection to the Shell Oil Company, but it features shells in its designs. It has terracotta cladding. This is seen from a distance. This is the crown of the building, very elaborately decorated. You can see the shells up here at the very top. And on street level, we have the shell designs over the entrance to the building. And inside, these elaborate elevator doors with lotus flowers at the top of the elevators. Here's another Herman Bauman apartment building, built in 1928. Very elaborate building. It's on this busy boulevard here and a quiet residential street over here. So along the boulevard, we have these wonderful shops. Remember, we're still in San Francisco, but this is called the Little Hollywood Laundrette. And then along the residential street, we have the residential facade of the building with the three-sided bay, the decorative element underneath the bay, and this wonderful entrance. Again, spectacular lobby with an opening at the back and a chandelier to die for. And another preserved Art Deco sign. Bear with me while I figure out how to turn the page. These two pages are really stuck together. There we go. Okay, now we're going to the Telegraph Hill neighborhood and the Coit Memorial Tower. This tower is named after Lily Hitchcock Coit, who died in 1929. And she was a well-to-do woman. And in her will, she designated that 1/3 of her estate should go to an improvement, an unspecified improvement, artistic improvement to her beloved Telegraph Hill neighborhood. This was the product of that bequeathal. She was quite a character. She smoked cigars and wore trousers, and she was fascinated by firefighters and firefighting. There was no San Francisco Fire Department at the time. There were merely volunteer fire departments in each of the neighborhoods. But she would monitor her radio, and whenever there was a fire, she would speed to the fire and pitch in and help the firemen. And so she became a mascot of firemen. The Coit Memorial Tower is dedicated to the firemen of San Francisco. It's 210 feet high. It's was the subject of an art commission competition, which was won by Arthur Brown, who designed the tower. And inside, these fantastic murals funded by the Public Works of Art project of the New Deal, and painted by 27 mural artists from the California School of Fine Arts. They depict various professions, men at work in San Francisco, people protesting, people printing newspapers, businessmen in suits and topcoats, ordinary citizens on the streets and going about their business, and the agricultural areas around San Francisco, including the wine country and the dairy farmers. Quite a spectacular collection of murals. No survey of San Francisco Art Deco would be complete without going across the bay and visiting Berkeley and Oakland. And this is the United Artists Theater in Berkeley. Notice the artistry plaque over here and the Unity plaque on the other side. Notice also the frozen fountain design. This is a close-up of the Unity, which clearly needed restoration in 2007. Hopefully that has been accomplished by now. It still serves as a movie theater. Wonderful Art Deco chandeliers and these extraordinary murals. And a very fanciful stair rail, almost space age. This is the Berkeley Public Library. Notice the peaked windows and these decorative elements in the windows. They are seahorses. The library was designed by James Plachek and built in 1930. And it has these wonderful Mayan-inspired column capitals. This is Berkeley High School, which shows striking resemblances to the gymnasium of our own old Miami Beach High School. Designed by Henry Gutterson and Will Corset and built in 1939. Which accounts for the streamlined designing. And this is the Life Sciences building at UC Berkeley, designed by George Kellum. Sort of a Greco-Deco building. And then in Oakland, I want to show you 3 spectacular commercial buildings in downtown Oakland. This one is by Douglas Stone, built in 1931, with this wonderful terracotta cornice and these black and silver pilasters on either side of the building. Here's a detail. And this may be my favorite building ever. It just is eye-popping, this building. Designed by Albert Evers and built in 1931 with polychrome terracotta cladding and aluminum window frames that just pop out. I mean, it's just the most wonderful contrast between the aluminum and the terracotta. The building was in the process of being restored when I was there. And notice again the Art Deco sign that survives on the left side over here. This is the crown of the building. And the I. Magnin department store. Again, a beautiful, colorful building designed by Weeks and Day and built in 1931 with frozen fountains in the window spandrels. And the Fox Oakland Theater, also by Weeks and Day and built in 1928. It has wonderful Hindu and Islamic motifs, also under renovation at the time. And then the Paramount Theater by Timothy Pfluger, built in 1931. These tile decorations on the facade of the building were inspired by gates, which no longer exist, but were at the Paris Exposition in 1925, which had a similar design. And again, Oakland has its share of surviving Art Deco signs, some of which are not in great shape, and others of which are quite lovely. And no survey of San Francisco architecture would be complete without talking about San Francisco streetcars. These are called PCC streetcars. PCC stands for the President's Conference Committee, a committee formed by the American Streetcar Association, which came together because they were bored with the boxy industrial design of old streetcars. And they wanted to design something more modern. So they came up with these beautiful streamlined designs, which have been called the best streetcar ever designed. At one time, there were 4,500 PCCs serving 33 American cities. The first went into service in 1936. San Francisco was the last city in the United States to adopt the PCC streetcar. But San Francisco had the genius to acquire these streetcars from other cities as they abandoned them. And the continued genius to continue to paint them in the original colors of the cities they came from. So they are truly spectacular Art Deco ornaments that can be seen running along the streets of San Francisco. On we go to Los Angeles. Like Miami, Los Angeles is a 20th century city. At the turn of the 20th century, there was very little there, just like there was very little here. And so, while Los Angeles has its Art Deco buildings from the late 20s and early 30s, it also has its Art Deco buildings from the late 30s. So it's quite a mix of styles. The first building boom happened here in the 1920s. It happened in Los Angeles in the 1920s. Here we had a hiatus in building between the 1920s and the late 1930s. Almost all of our Art Deco buildings were built in 1935 or later. The major exception to that was the old library building, now part of the Bass Museum, which dates from 1930 and reflects those kinds of decorative elements. But in Los Angeles, the building boom continued right through the 1930s, fed largely by the success of the film industry, which was adopted by Los Angeles and which adopted Art Deco as the backdrop for the movies of the period. This is the City Hall, Los Angeles City Hall, designed by Austin, Martin, and Parkinson and built in 1928. It was the tallest building in Los Angeles until the 1960s. There's a very good reason for that. Los Angeles had height limits, a height limit of 150 feet until 1957. And so Los Angeles has no really tall Art Deco buildings except for City Hall. Notice the ziggurat pyramid on top of the building. This is the exterior entrance to the building, which has a wonderful tile flooring, and these decorative elements representing the various industries that made Los Angeles what it was, including, of course, the film industry. And then Union Station is a later building, built in 1935 and designed by John and Donald Parkinson, a pair of brother architects. We'll be talking a lot about them, and I will just refer to them from now on as the Parkinson brothers. This was the terminal of the Santa Fe Railroad. And in their promotional materials, they referred to this building as streamlining a pueblo. And it is a great example of Mission Deco architecture. Very much in use still. This is the waiting room, the main waiting room, and it has some wonderful side rooms that are virtually empty. But still open and available to the public for those who will venture into them, like myself, but apparently nobody else does. Notice the wonderful pueblo design in the terrazzo floor. And this is the Los Angeles Times newspaper building. Designed by Gordon Kaufman and built in 1935. The three statues over the entrance represent Father Time on the left, the Spirit of the Times in the middle, and Gutenberg on the right. Notice the spectacular Deco eagles. And the circular lobby with a globe in the middle, and the signs of the zodiac around the equator. And these spectacular murals by Hugo Ballin. This is the elevator lobby. And then we have the Central Library, designed by Goodyear Winslow and built in 1926. It has Byzantine, Egyptian, and Spanish influences. And the pyramid at the top of the tower has this sun design on all four sides. And I was lucky enough to be there when the moon was about to be eclipsed by the sun. This is the title guarantee building, designed by the Parkinson brothers and built in 1930. Buff-colored terracotta. I suppose you could call it Gothic Deco. Notice in particular the Art Deco flying buttresses. This building from a distance looks pretty plain. But on the ground level, it is spectacular. It's the Oviatt building, and Oviatt went to the Paris Exposition, and he owned the Alexander and Oviatt haberdashery, which occupied the lower floors and the ground floor of this building. These are original. This is not original. This is the sign for the Cicada restaurant, which currently occupies the space which was originally owned by occupied by the haberdashery. This element at the top here is a copy of this original element in the facade of the building. And as I said, Oviatt attended the Paris Exposition, and so he hired no less than René Lalique to design these doors and these lighting fixtures. There are damn few American buildings that can boast René Lalique decorative elements, but these are original. This is the Eastern Columbia building, not associated with Eastern Airlines. It housed the Eastern Outfitting Company and the Columbia Outfitting Company. One of them was a clothing company, and the other was an interior furnishings company. Designed by Claude Bellman in 1929, it features turquoise and blue terracotta with gold leaf. Really an extraordinarily beautiful building. It now is luxury loft condos. And this is the recessed entrance to the building. Pacific Coast Stock Exchange was designed by the Parkinson Brothers and built in 1929. And this is the Mayan Theater by Morgan Walls and Clements, 1927, with a facade by the Mexican designer Francisco Cornejo. If you've been to the Mayan ruins in Mexico or Guatemala, much of this will look very familiar to you. The colors were added in 1960. They are not original. Much like the colors in our buildings were not added until the 1980s. But this is what it originally looked like. This wonderful, Mayan calendar is on the ceiling of the entrance to the building. Just riotous decorative elements everywhere you look. And this building looks as though if you put it in the ocean, it would float. It's the Coca-Cola bottling plant by Robert Defray. And as you might guess, it dates from the late 1930s. But what's surprising to me about this particular example of marine deco architecture is that it imitates a freighter, not an ocean liner, which I guess is probably appropriate for an industrial facility. Notice even the loading doors look like the loading doors of a freighter. And here we have the Los Angeles Coliseum, also designed by the Parkinson Brothers and built in 1931 for the 10th Olympiad, which took place in 1932. We have here in Miami Beach an artifact from the 1932 Olympics, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. This aluminum statue in the Wilsonian Museum, designed by Dudleyville Talcott in 1929. It was not designed for the Olympics, but it was entered into an artistic competition which was part of the Olympics. The ancient Greek Olympics included artistic competitions as well as sports competitions. And in the early part of the 20th century, many of the modern Olympics also included art competitions. I think it's a shame that the Olympic Games no longer include artistic competitions. But this was one of 7 pieces of art that were awarded honorable mention in the 1932 Olympic Arts Competition. The nearby swimming stadium was also built for the Olympics and still serves today as a swimming facility open to the public. It has these wonderful light stanchions along the sidewalks leading to the building, and seahorses over the building, over the entrance. Now, this particular apartment building designed by Guthrie Thursby wouldn't look out of place in Miami Beach. It dates from 1939. And I love the fact that they still have the fallout shelter sign. This is the Val d'Amour Apartments by G.W. Powers, dating from 1928. Val d'Amour is French for Veil of Love, and looking at this entrance, I could easily fall in love. Now we're going to Wilshire Boulevard. Wilshire Boulevard is just one long string of spectacular Art Deco buildings. This is the Bullock's Wilshire department store. Winnett, who financed the Bullock's department store, also attended the Paris Exposition, as did the Parkinson brothers. And so they designed this building, which was inspired by the Paris Exposition. It has been considered by some to be LA's Art Deco masterpiece, and it certainly is worthy of that title. This is the crown of the building and the main entrance. Over the entrance, it says, "To build a business that will never know completion." Well, this business knew completion. This building is no longer Bullock's department store. It is now the Southwestern University School of Law. Can you imagine attending school in a building like this? Down Wilshire Boulevard from Bullock's is the Wiltern Theater, named because it stands at the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Western Boulevard. Designed by Morgan, Walls, and Clements and built in 1931 with beautiful blue-green tile cladding. And it looks just as beautiful at night as it does in the daytime. This is the entrance to the office lobby. And the post office box. The Wiltern Theater was saved from demolition in the 1980s, by the way. Down further along Wilshire Boulevard is the Oasis Theater. Remember the United Artists Theater that we saw in Oakland? Well, originally the Oasis Theater had the artistry and unity panels on the facade of this building. This was originally the United Artists Theater. But when it went out of business as a theater, it was purchased by a church. And those panels were just too racy for the church. So unfortunately, they removed them from the building. But it still has its beautiful Art Deco form, and it uses glass block to great effect. Down further on Wilshire Boulevard is the El Rey Theater by Clifford Batch, dating from 1936. It's no longer a movie theater, it's now a music venue. And it has this wonderful terrazzo floor which extends all the way out to the curb. And then a little further down Wilshire Boulevard is this totally unique Dark Room, it's called, by Marcus Miller, 1938. It is a camera store. And the facade is a black Vitrolite 35 millimeter camera, backed by glass block. Now we're going to Hollywood. The Hollywood Bowl was designed by Allied architects and built in 1929. Notice the Hollywood sign in the hills in the background. And this muse of music stands at the entrance to the Hollywood Bowl, but it is not original. It was added in 1940 and designed by George Stanley. George Stanley is also the designer of the Oscar statuette. And here's Grauman's Egyptian Theater by Meyer and Haller, built in 1922, 3 years before the Paris Exposition. It was significantly damaged in 1994 earthquake and completely restored by 1998. And it still serves as a movie theater. And then the Pantages Theater by Marcus Proteca dates from 1929. Alexander Pantages, who developed the theater, was not present at the opening. He was in the Los Angeles County Jail, accused of the attempted rape of a 17-year-old girl. Some things in Hollywood never change. The theater was restored in 2000. And still in Hollywood, these are the Montecito Apartments by Marcus Miller, 1931. And the Hollywood and Western Building by Charles Lee, 1928. It looks like a residential building, but it was actually built as an office building. And its purpose was to house Hollywood production companies, which is why the decorative elements relate to the arts and to the kinds of activities that went on in Hollywood at the time. This is an amazingly fanciful building. It was a veterinary office. I don't know if it still serves as a veterinary office, but it's a wonderful building dating from 1930 and designed by Ted Cooper. Speaking of fanciful buildings, this is the Crossroads of the World by Robert Dara, 1936. The globe rotates, and behind the tower is this tugboat, which is occupied by restaurants and stores selling food and goods from around the world, which is why it's called the Crossroads. Hollywood High, dating from 1935 and designed by Marsh, Smith and Powell. And of course, this being Hollywood, it's filled with Art Deco movie studios. I will only give you a quick look at 4 of them because for some reason they wouldn't allow me inside the studios. And then one of my favorite buildings in Los Angeles, the Griffith Observatory by John Austin and F.M. Ashley, built in 1935. It was closed for refurbishing in 2002 through 2006. I was there in 2007. Notice again the Hollywood sign in the distance. This is the mural on the ceiling of the entrance lobby and on one wall of the entrance lobby. This is the elevator lobby. You can go up to the roof of the building. The beautiful Queen Mary, built by the Cunard Lines and dedicated and launched in 1934. It is not named after Bloody Mary. It is named after the consort of George V, who was on the throne in 1934 when the Queen Mary was launched. The interior was designed and constructed by the Grooms Grove Guild of Applied Arts. It has these amazing, wonderful light fixtures and etched glass. You can take a tour of the ship, but much of what you are going to see in these pictures is not on the tour. But you can just wander around through the ship and you discover the most incredible rooms. Like this one, for instance. And this one. The Queen Mary was decommissioned in 1967 and bought by the city of Long Beach. It steamed into Long Beach Harbor that year. Oh, I didn't mention, excuse me, I skipped over some very important stuff. It was the first ocean liner equipped with a Jewish prayer room. And that was very purposeful on the part of Cunard Lines. They wanted to distinguish Britain from the Germany of 1934. And it served as a troop ship during World War II, much as our hotels housed the troops during World War II. It is the last surviving Art Deco ocean liner. It currently hosts a hotel, exhibition space, and it has an event venue. That concludes our tour of West Coast Deco. Are there questions? Yes.
What is the preservation attitude in California? Is it statewide? Is it county? Is it municipality?
It's municipality based, but there is a, it's called the California, I don't remember the exact title now, but in any event, it's based in San Francisco. But there are preservation movements in each of the cities that we visited, yes.
Do any of these cities have an Art Deco center like we do?
Yes, both San Francisco and Los Angeles have Art Deco societies. I don't know if Seattle does. Do you know?
And do they have a physical presence like we do, museum, tours?
The San Francisco society does, yes. Any other questions? All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.